Here, but I'm going to be talking today about is your org ready for the first 24 hours after a data breach? And unfortunately, most people are not. So, as always, we're going to kind of go talk about what is office hours, a little bit of the roles and engagements, introductions, recap from last week. We had a really amazing session from Mala last week about security and DevOps and Salesforce. And as always, are hot off the press, and I'll jump right into the session. So let's get right into it. So what is Salesforce Security Office Hours for the new people and for the people that are watching this video later in the recording? Basically, I started Salesforce Security Office Hours because it was created in response to the troubling reality that data breaches in the Salesforce ecosystem continue to increase, not decrease. Too many organizations are still losing sensitive customer data to attacks that could have been prevented. And these sessions really exist to change that. Each session focuses on Salesforce specific security best practices presented by Salesforce experts and sometimes myself, and to provide clear, actionable steps that you can take today to strengthen your data security and reduce the risk of a breach in your own Salesforce environments at your companies or and organizations and customers. So, really, this is an open engagement. The format is just wanted to give you a quick overview today. So, first and foremost, we want to keep this respectful and an inclusive space. Everyone's here to learn, and all questions are welcome. There are no bad questions. This is an open and interactive session, so feel free to engage as we go. If you want to stop and ask some questions, as long as you don't interrupt, that's fine. If you have a question, please either raise your hand or speak up if there's no one else speaking at the time. Finally, I encourage you to take notes and think about what we're discussing, how it applies to your own Salesforce environment, because the goal here is for you to walk away with something actionable so you can start working on those items and implementing them today. All right, so about me, really quick, if you don't know me, haven't met me, my name's Matt Myers. I'm the CEO and founder of EzProtect and a Salesforce certified technical architect with over 19 years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem. I'm also the author of the best-selling book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, and a founding member of the Low Code Security Alliance. Basically, it's my mission in life to help educate people on what they should be doing to keep their data safe in Salesforce, especially with all these breaches that are happening recently, which is very unfortunate. So, a little bit about us, Easy Protect. We basically, as I said, we've established Salesforce Security Office Hours because protecting got customer data requires more than just enabling it on the platform. It requires understanding how threats actually are showing up today. And I mean, if you think about 2025 alone, there were more than 900 Salesforce related breaches that involve things like targeted phishing attacks, and a lot of them designed to steal credentials or even introduce malicious content. So, for those who don't know, which I'm sure most of you do on this call, Salesforce currently does not scan files or links uploaded into the platform for viruses or phishing, which means customers have an opportunity to add additional protections based on the risk profile. And we help organizations do that by strengthening their security posture, protecting customers from malicious links and files in Salesforce. If that sounds interesting to you or you think it applies to your environment, we've got a great QR code there if you want to sign up for a risk-free assessment before we can see if you're at risk or today. All right, great. So let's get into our recap for last week. This was a really exciting session by Mala, and she kind of went over, thinking about what you should be well, she called it shift left security for Salesforce, which is basically thinking about DevSecOps in the Salesforce ecosystem. So things like start with, secret standing, eradicate those hard-coded credentials from your local dev environments, make sure your source control. I mean, there actually were it's a couple of these breaches lately where because credentials were found in their source control, and then they were able to get access to their environments and their customers' environments to do their source control systems because those credentials were exposed. Make sure you're right sizing your service account access. Don't give admin access to your integration users. Don't share your integration or scope your API access in your ECAs and your connected apps, building in CI/CD gates that enforce, compliance automatically, making sure, that it's just not a manual process and it's a continuous thing because security is continuous. It's not this thing, this one and done. But anyway, it was a really exciting office hours. I learned a lot myself. So if you want to look, get into it, you can click that QR code there. All right. Next up, hot off the press. This is actually something that is near and dear to my heart a little bit, or it pains my heart, I would say. Um, so, basically, the Scattered Lapis Hunters Alliance, they're a they is phishing currently 100 plus global orgs using real-time phishing kits to intercept single sign-on credentials basically by bypassing MFA and manipulating their victims into proving authentication challenges like over the phone. And so basically what the way this is working, and I've always thought this myself, is SSO is great, but SSO is also one of your biggest weak points in your organization. So imagine you have your single sign-on, you've got your phone here, and you put your code in. Well, now you've got access to every single environment in your entire organization, or at least the environments that you have access to. So imagine an attacker got access to that account. I mean, the way that these guys are doing it is they're calling them up, pretending to be IT or something, getting them to give them their code because a lot of users just don't know or not aware, or they shouldn't be giving that out. Once they give them that code, they've had their password already. Now they have their code. They get in, and now they've access to not just your Salesforce environment, but every single environment that SSO is hooked up to, which is really dangerous. And so even though the multi-factor, is great to have and convenient, of course, there's also that security risk that if that is compromised, those attackers have access to everything. Also, you could think of like man in the middle attacks or session hijacking. If they grab that person's session in the middle, and then the same thing happens. They now have access to all those users' environments that they're connected to. So if you want to think about how do we protect ourselves from these types of attacks? If users can just give out that token over the phone, well, that's kind of going back to kind of the older days, what they had before. You had your one-time passwords, you had hardware keys, hardware tokens, you had biometric things that where you physically had a physical possession of like a YubiKey where you stick it into your port. You have to put your finger on it so that it will then, give that secondary authentication. Also, as another way that this works just as well are most, especially if you're using a MacBook or even PCs, a lot of PCs these days come with like a fingerprint reader and then you can use your SSO system, like if you have Okta, for example, to use the SSO, the hardware SSO they're using by using fingerprint authentication. And so now they can't give away their fingerprint to that attacker. So if you're using that kind of authentication, then you will not have someone using your phone and giving away that code. And also another thing that we're starting to do internally ourselves is even after they've logged in to stop those man-in-the-middle attacks, session hijacking, if there is a sensitive system someone's trying to access to, it asks you again, even though you've already authenticated the first time or had that two-factor, it asks you again if you're accessing a sensitive system, maybe with elevated privileges or other things, again to give that biometric. So for example, if we're going to hit our AWS account, then people have to use their fingerprint if they're going to get into that AWS account, even if they're already authenticated. So these are really good ways that you can prevent against people being able to game your users into giving away those MFA codes, going back to hardware-based authentication, or at least hardware-based for your very sensitive systems, if it's not possible to do that for everything. So. All right, moving on now to is your Salesforce org ready for the first 24 hours after a breach? So I want to talk about thing here is like is most reality is most teams are not ready for a breach, and most organizations, as I've been talking about since we started office hours, is the reason is because security roles don't really exist too much in the Salesforce world. So you have those IT teams who are doing auditing the orgs that know a lot about security but don't know much about Salesforce. You have the Salesforce teams generally that know a lot about Salesforce, maybe know understand Salesforce permissions, but don't know about security. Then you've got the executives saying that, hey, everyone's got it handled. So that's kind of where these gaps come in, and really what we're trying to change here in that. So the one thing that I really are focusing, and our even our internal teams are focusing on, is looking at breach management or threat management. It's and everyone talks about preparation, but they don't really talk about, well, what happens when we actually have a breach? And NIST has this really great framework called the Threat Response Lifecycle. It's basically taking you through the entire life cycle of a breach, all the way from identification to notification, containment, containing that breach, removing it from everywhere that that breach happened, recovering from it, maybe restoring backups, fixing the data, making sure nothing's left. And then the most important is learning from that breach. Did you learn your lesson? And then one thing people miss in the learning phase is, even though you learned your lesson, are you sure it's not going to happen again? Let's go back to that phishing example. Your user got phished that or got vished and they gave out their code. Then, now, okay, that's how they got in. That was a breach. Okay, we're going to give them security awareness training. We're done. Check the box. No. And you did it really worked. So what you need to do is get them that training, get them coaching, making sure they understand. But then, not just once, but multiple times over the next few months, start testing them that user again, target that user, try to see if they will give away the code again if they ever do things, or that group of users, or that type of persona of users. Maybe it's support people. And are your systems working? Did that fix work? That's the true lesson learned. And that's really what most organizations need to be doing to ensuring that things, that issues don't happen. So just kind of going through what we have here on the slide. So like, let me here's some examples of people already. Like all those connected app compromises, like that happened with Salesloft, Drift, Gainsight, and that exposed hundreds of orgs. I mean, many teams discovered the breach through social media, not official channels. Are you watching these channels? Are watching the news? I mean, we're just seeing every week in 2025 there was a new breach. These organizations, you don't have the right people watching, because I mean, if it's my organization, and it is, I see all these breaches happen. We were making changes immediately as soon as we saw all these connected apps getting breached. We weren't just waiting to be the next one to show up on the list. So you need to make sure that you're having those people, because that first 24 hours is really, that's where the most damage is happening. And then that there's that metric out there is 204 days before someone actually detects a breach, typically within an organization. So then that they're doing the most damage at 24 hours, but then statistically they're continuing that damage for almost three-fourths of a year before they're even caught. And so I think it really comes down to, are you monitoring right? Do you know what's actually happening in your org? Where are your users coming from? This is the kind of thing that you want to be thinking about. And then also, as we were talking about, like the OAuth access tokens, bypassing MFA or having no MFA, having no UI restrictions, or sharing your API users, not realizing that, not having the right policies in place. Because like the one thing that's dangerous about the ECAs, enterprise connected apps, and just connected apps in general, or client apps, is once that token's established, even if you reset the password, that token doesn't get rotated, doesn't get reset. So you should be rotating those tokens, making sure that just like your passwords, treating that different. So this is really just examples of how these attackers are able to take advantage of these systems, because it's kind of like a set it and forget it mentality, it seems, in security with a lot of people. They're setting it, they just leave it, and then everything's good until it's not. And they're not really watching what's going on actively, rotating those tokens, actively understanding what's going on, what kind of breaches are going out there. And that's something you would do in normal ecosystems. Like most systems, that's a security best practice. But for some reason, it's not happening in the Salesforce ecosystem. These are things that you should be thinking about in your own organizations to stop that. So anyway, let's talk about the first hour, detection and assessment. So as we were talking about that NIST threat response lifecycle, this is that first part of that first phase of that lifecycle. That's the detection and identification phase and assessment. You're assessing kind of what's happening. Is this a risk? Is this a threat? What do we need to do about that? So first off, foremost, you need to confirm the breach, and this first comes with monitoring, the ability to detect the breach, having the right tools in place. That's like Shield, other tools out there that that are on top of Shield, giving you that notification quick. Looking at your like setup auto trail, looking at your Shield logs, having automated notifications going out, letting if there's things, looking at your connected apps, or is there anything out there that you shouldn't have? Where are your users coming from? Are they logging in from China, but you don't have anyone in China? I think that's some of the stuff. Looking for these anomalous patterns in your access. Are you getting a lot of requests from the same IP address for API requests all at once? That's not expected from an IP you don't know. Identify the attack vector, especially identify the most common types of attack vectors. Was it a connected app compromise? What about the MFA for your users? This is a really interesting one. Do your users today in your org have compromised credentials? There's this whole thing that's, forever companies do, and let's have our users change their passwords every 90 days. Now, stew on this. What if you force your users to change their password and they change the password from a secure password to a password that is in a data breach somewhere? Now you've actually made your system less secure by forcing them to change the password. A better idea is, instead of having to change the password, validate that their password is not in a breach somewhere. And only if it is in a breach, that's when that password becomes insecure, right? So, looking at other things like, looking at vendor communications, what's going on in social media? Are there mass breaches like what happened with Gainsight? You're using Gainsight and they had this breach of all their customers? You're probably going to be on that list. So you should understand and be monitoring that stuff to see what is happening. What did you miss, going on, so you can confirm or understand when you have the breach. Second phase is establishing and assessing that blast radius. How bad is it? What is impacted? What groups are impacted? What business units? What data is in there? Look at all, what's the scope? Look at all of your connected apps. Look at your users. Look at, what has been impacted? How much has it been impacted? I mean, worst case, you could always expire all your passwords, expire all your tokens, remove anyone access from your org if you don't know where it's coming from, of course. Um, Map users to authorize and the compromised app, figure out what scopes were granted for your connected apps, determine, what data could have been accessed with those apps or those tokens. And so, and then and then document if this vendor was the vendor breach, what's data was breached from this vendor or from multiple vendors. So that this is kind of thinking of, and of course, the how bad is it? What kind of data is it? How bad is it for our organization if this data is out? If it starts becoming public, what will our customers think? And what do you do to fix it? And then the next phase is going to be now stop the bleeding, right? Revoke all, like I said, revoke all those tokens. This is the containment phase now, once you've identified it. Making sure that you don't have any of those compromised tokens there anymore, freezing users, blocking unknown IP addresses, and only allowing IP addresses, rotating all your credentials. Get it out of there. Or in the case of viruses, you've removed all those any viruses they have, removing malicious links. Anything that's basically stop the bleeding is all about containing that breach, removing any trace of that breach, so that breach does not continue to expand in your organization. And then looking at, like we said, securing all those entry points, understanding where people could coming in, blocking or uninstalling connected apps, checking for malicious code in your Apex scheduled jobs, external integrations even as well that are coming in, um, forcing that org-wide password resets, as I've mentioned earlier, expiring your active sessions, and remembering that password resets do not reset integration sessions where they're using OAuth, because those are those refresh tokens that need to be reset separately. And then coordinating with your teams. I mean, a lot of teams always they have a your your emergency plan, your business disaster recovery plan, your business continuity plan. Who is your escalation path? Who do you escalate to when this breach happens? What teams do you have to get on? Do you get together on the call to talk about that? What leadership needs to be involved? What external parties need to be involved? Do you need to call the authorities? Do you have all those numbers in a place you can get to quickly? Do you have a communication plan? Also, another people don't think about is insurance for people that are smaller organizations. What kind of do you need to contact your insurance providers because you're now going to be have compliance issues, or do you have the right coverage you need at this point? And then the next phase that we're going through is now we're moved into we've finished containing the issue. Now we're going to recovery. So the issue is no longer bleeding. We've fixed it. We've identified it. Now what damage was done? It's like after a bomb went off, you need to start rebuilding things, fix everything where you have all the issues. So in your plan, you should have a way to having that restore point. So let's just say you had data that got corrupted. You had ransomware and they encrypted your data and you don't pay the ransom. Okay, what's that restore point that you're comfortable with to restore your data back to if there's a problem? Or think of people, sometimes attackers will corrupt your data. Maybe it's bank account routing information, and they change your bank account numbers to route that stuff that the deposits to their account instead of yours. What data might have been altered or changed that you need to fix so to restore operations back to where they were. I mean, also not just comparing your data itself in Salesforce, looking at your metadata. Like what kind of metadata do you have? Like, I mean, I've seen where Apex code was changed to route things also to different places. So what kind of things, were altered in your org? Sometimes it's a silent attack where you don't know it. They just secretly change things and then silently things are leaving your org and people don't think to check those things after a breach when they understand there's a problem going on. You know, then the next thing is, what changes are you making after today? This is kind of looking at those lessons learned, that last thing I was talking about early in the beginning. So, looking at understanding how it happened, how do you fix that? Again, the side of validating that you fixed it, adding new processes like new security architecture reviews when things go in, ensuring that changes that go in are not safe. You're following a standardized procedure practice, combining manual reviews with automated reviews. Documenting, this is something we're even doing ourselves internally, documenting all of your connected apps. What do they do? What data do they access? What's the owner? All your app exchange packages, same thing. What data do they have? Who's the owner of that? What kind of external integrations do they have? Understanding that when new things are coming in, having that Salesforce specific security review so you understand what risks this new release is going to open up. And then also when a new release comes out or a new issue, social media or new breach comes out, do you already have that thing, in place today that other people are that are being taken advantage for that breach? It's just like with servers and desktops, you have to patch when a bug comes out, a security issue comes out, you have to patch that environment. Well, the same thing might be true for Salesforce. Let's say you have a managed package that was found to have a security issue. Well, you need to upgrade that managed package to patch that. Or Salesforce, finds something that maybe was a vulnerability in themselves. Well, you need to make sure that you are not doing that thing that they said that's causing that vulnerability. So this is other stuff, and then other things to look at here are, like I said before a couple times, establishing token rotation policies. Just don't leave the same token in place since the beginning of time. Force a rotation of that token, because if that token also, just like passwords, was stolen, and then that token was on a breached list, then attackers could be using that token to get into your API, and then coupling that with IP security puts even more of a protection on top. And then last but not least, test, 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 try it again. That's why in sports, you look at football or everything that they practice. Practicing makes perfect, right? So if you practice, you get better. You understand better. You see where the gaps are in your plays, in your processes. So if you don't practice, you don't know if it's going to work. And then and testing. So, you practice and then you test. Did that work? Did we win? Did we stop that breach? Did we test our users? Like, for example, internally, most companies just do that. Internally, we test our users every once a week with a different type of phishing attack, simulated phishing attack that comes in, and then we measure to see who did it. And if anyone that clicked on that, we go out and give them coaching, give them training, then we monitor them to make sure that they don't do that again. So I'll proactive testing, proactive rehearsing, practicing. So anyway, that pretty much is all everything is like, I'm wearing my shirts today, and you is the, only you can prevent and contain data breaches in Salesforce. So let's see here. So let's get a little bit of, engagement here. If a connected app you rely on was compromised tonight, do you know which users authorized it and what data can access? I mean, 'cause that's a really scary thing if you think about it. It's like, do you know all of your connected apps in your org? And is there anyone here that would like to, jump on for a little bit of a chat about that? Like, I'd love to. I mean, you don't have to answer the question of your own orgs itself, but I'd love to hear just what your perspective is on that. How comfortable are you in your orgs today that you know what data would be compromised if one of those connected apps was compromised? So. Anybody feel like want to want to chime in there? Let me know. And I hear silence. Guess everyone's afraid or not sure. Stephen,
Sure,
feel free.
I'll give you a little interaction. Yeah, so literally, while I'm listening to you talk, I am looking at our connected apps in our Salesforce org, and I am able to see the usage, and I'm able to see, who's authorized through those connected apps. And it's clear to me that we're not regularly cleaning people out who connected, 3 years ago and haven't used it in 2 years. Um, so I think I'll work with my team to make sure that they've got a procedure to, quarterly go out through and see who authorized an app but is no longer using it and can be disconnected.
Yep.
And then it's pretty easy to see, on that screen, and I won't share my screen, but on that page inside of Salesforce setup, monitor OAuth app usage, you can kind of see who's authorized. And that's very
Yep.
beneficial. I'd have to go look at what their particular data access levels were to know what data can be accessed. But um,
Yeah, I
I
think.
think the biggest challenge for our group is just routinizing the maintenance of it so that we stay ahead of it.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
it just needs to be built into your release process, right? That's really what it should be.
I think the other thing that you could speak to is when I look at our connected apps, it's hard for me to determine, and maybe this is shame on me, but how many of those are from Salesforce themselves,
Hmm.
right? Apps to connect with Pardot, or apps to connect with Agentforce, or apps to connect with other modules we bought in Salesforce. So I'm always a little tentative on disconnecting connected apps. You don't know what you're going to break.
Yep. I think it's again back to that balance of, do you take the risk of leaving it in that it's something that is someone's, it's suspicious, or do you turn it off and risk users getting angry, right? And also, but I think part of that also you kind of see when it was the last used. So if something was not used recently, it's probably okay to turn it off and just see who complains versus if it's being used daily, then it's kind of a business risk decision at that point, at what point. But I think either way, you should be having an inventory of all your connected apps, of your app exchange packages. And sometimes it's, a lot of times there is a differential. They're not one to one, of course, as well. And then I think the first thing is assigning an owner to every one of those. Who owns that connected app from an internal perspective? What data does that connected app use or is being exposed for that, right? So that way, then and that would be part of your ongoing release process. When a new ECA or connected app is being installed, then before it's allowed to be installed, you are documenting that, go through a formal approval process to approve that to go into your org, right? And then in the future, now you have this inventory of knowing who owns what it does, and if it's even, and what's the business justification for it, right? And also the security for it. And it also gives you the ability to review the security too. Like we had a vendor we were onboarding recently that had the big no-no of just turn on, sysadmin for everything, modify all data for everything. And we were like, no, it does not work that way. What data do you need access to? And we will, evaluate that and grant it. We're not just going to turn on admin for everything, right? So I think it's about traceability in the end of who, who's using that data and what's it for, right?
And Matt, I
So
think starting Spring 26, right? You can't create a new connected apps going forward. You can do only external connected app, external client
that,
apps, right?
that is correct. We actually I was in a sandbox yesterday trying to test a new tool that we're evaluating, and it was no possibility to create a connected app at all. I had to create a ECA for that because that's just not, they've sunsetted now actual creation of connected apps. Existing ones still exist, of course, but new ones you cannot do that anymore. So that's a great call out. All right, so some other just follow-on questions just to think about. So, if a connect app was compromised tonight, do you know which users authorized it? What data connects us? We kind of talked about that. Who in your organization gets the call at 2 a.m. when a breach is discovered? Do you have a call tree? Do you have an escalation tree? Do they know what to do first? And this is one of the big things a lot of organizations don't have in place, especially in the Salesforce world, is who is responsible for that breach? That goes back to data ownership. What teams? Who's your firefighting team that you need to wake up first thing to start, fight the fire? Do they know what steps they can go to? Do they know who they need to call? I've read these interesting, I think there's a book or a blog somewhere about about the evolution of a data breach. And it showed a company that was a real data breach and what happened. And it was like chickens running around with their heads cut off. They didn't know what to do. They were just all freaking out. Oh my God, we're being breached. What do we do? What do we do? Let's call this person. Let's call this person because they didn't have a formal process in place. They didn't know who to call, when to call, what to do, how to shut things off. And so this is really, you need to have your firefighting team. You need to have your firefighting plan and your step-by-step process of what to do. And also not all breaches are the same. What are the different scenarios for different types of breaches? And who is responsible for those breaches? Who gets reached out? At what level do you involve different people as well? Because not all, maybe it's something that's handled a smaller team, no data was actually breached, or maybe it's something just a memo that gets sent out later. But maybe right now it's an active breach, data is involved. Now you have to involve leadership and other teams. So this is stuff that you just want to think about. Do you have this is this in place in your team today? Which I'm guessing most organizations, that's going to be a no. And also the same thing here. Have you tested revoking your tokens? Do you know what's the process for revoking your tokens, for rotating your tokens? What happened? Do you know today what you would do to ensure that no one could access your org if you're having a widespread breach in your Salesforce org currently? Does your cyber insurance policy actually cover a third-party connected app compromise? Are you assuming it does? Are you underinsured? What does your insurance look like for these third-party data breaches? I mean, I would go on top of that. Do your contracts with your customers have, provisions covering you if your third-party provider had a breach? If like looking at again, Gainsight as the example. Okay, you're using Gainsight, they were breached. Do you have the correct contractual and insurance coverage to cover that? Because also, what kind of insurance do they have? Do they have enough insurance to cover a breach for your data in your organization? So this is kind of some other just food for thought of things that you should be thinking about. And I would say most companies I talk to, the answer is no for all of these. And this is why I wanted to bring up this important topic today. So. All right, so I mean, that's pretty much all the content I have for today. But of course, this is the point where we open up the session for more discussions. Just talk about a couple upcoming office hours we have. Is next one was bringing Beach back in. He's very, very knowledgeable about Salesforce security. Great guy all around. He's going to talk about vibe coding, secure vibe coding. So really interesting topic. And then we're going to have Richard coming in, a good friend of mine, and he's going to say, talk about how do you just secure a Salesforce org when you can't see what's actually changing in that org. So that's going to be a great a great discussion as well. So, as always, here's some resources. If you wanted to get a copy of my book, all proceeds are going to nonprofit, good causes. There more security resources and also all the Salesforce Security Office Hours videos on YouTube or and other resources. At this point, I'm going to open up the floor for more questions and discussion. I would love to hear your take on these things. How prepared are you? How prepared do you think people are? Is there anything that's burning even off of this topic that you want answers to right now that I can help get you those answers to help you with your mission? I think we do have some stuff in chat, but Dan, I know you asked, I see a bunch of stuff in chat there. Um, Dan, you want to just come on mic and we can talk it out a little bit?
Yeah, sure, Matt. A lot of organizations, I think, use developer sandboxes and they allow the developer to have system admin in that developer sandbox.
Hmm.
That gives the developer the ability to say, create users that are non-SSO users or do things like install connected apps. Do you see in your interactions with other companies, Matt, organizations creating what I'll call as a system admin light profile and putting developers on this system admin light profile in their development environments so that they can't do things like create users or install apps in a development environment?
Yeah, actually, that's a really great point and great idea. And I have seen that in organizations, and not even in just the Salesforce world. I've seen the non-Salesforce world, of course, doing that too, where you have this, they have access to set up and config, but then a lot of it's read only depending on what they're doing. So they don't have access to that. Just be wary that depending on what you're doing, sometimes that you could, even if you don't give them permission, they could sometimes elevate
Yeah.
the permission. I've seen things like where they game it like you can't change your own profile, but then they still create a user. They create a user with a different profile, log in as that user to game the system. So I think part of that is sometimes you may not be able to completely block all the access, but also that's where monitoring comes in. So you can set that limited profile, but if you do something that we know you could still do, but we blocked it, and then you have repercussions. But I'm all for having that admin light, developer light in those sandboxes. So that's where, as you know, and I think you've brought this up before too, a lot of people don't think about those sandboxes. That a sandbox that has production data is a production system, right?
100%.
And treat it as such. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
get those consultants logins, deactivated as soon as they leave. Don't leave them in there for the next 2 years.
Yeah, one of the things that, kind of is in discussion with some of my peers across organizations is, using simple validation rules in development environments to control developer behavior. Sure, a developer can turn it off. There's got to be some accountability though, and, validation rules that say, don't turn this off, certainly can, make the developer, I think twice. But,
Mhm.
that's one of, I think it's really the next big attack vector is
Yep.
non-production environments. I mean, we're seeing
Oh,
all these data
totally.
breaches in production. Non-production environments is the next big attack vector, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, early in my career, I was part of one there was a non-production environment that was breached. So I completely understand that and know that for sure. So we'll get on to Stephen, your question, because that's actually one I'm very passionate about. And then if you want to put your question in chat, or if you just come on mic after I'm done, we talk to Stephen here, then we can talk about that. So Steven's asking here, can you speak to vendors that capture session ID in Visualforce pages using the API session ID flag and sending it off platform? I consider that a big no-no. I mean, I think a lot of vendors they might try to do that to cheat to kind of get away with having to do a connected app so they could just call the REST API directly. And I think that is a huge security risk sending any kind of session ID off platform. And I would flag that from the vendor of a big risk. And sadly, I've seen that kind of practice sometimes pass the Salesforce security review, and they don't catch that even. So this is go back to an earlier session I talked about is in the office hours was how to vet your App Exchange vendors. And so if you haven't watched that, you should definitely watch that. But I would say, Stephen, if you have any vendor doing that, push back. That is a major issue, and I would raise that as a huge, very big security risk. They should not be sending stuff off platform. They should be using the tools Salesforce provides to do it the right way. I don't know if you want to add more to that or if that's enough for you on that
Yeah,
topic.
I'm not really into name and shame, but I will share that I'm seeing this with Nintex, which is a
Yeah.
fairly big document
Uh-huh.
generation tool. So if you have that tool, you might want to take a look at it yourself.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all about, it's like, I'm not about name and shame, but I'm also about, calling out where responsibility should be called out. So then people make changes, right? I've
Yeah.
seen other vendors do the same thing and it's like you first call out to the vendor, tell the vendor, hey, this is bad. You should not be doing this. This is a huge risk, not only for yourself, for us, but yourselves alone. And then, of
Right.
course, raise it to your IT security team. Let them know, bring it up as a risk. Put if you have contractual leverage, put contractual leverage on them that they're in breach of the contract for having insecure coding practices because that is a insecure coding practice doing that, right?
Thank you.
Yep. And I'm sorry, Waruna, I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm butchering your name, but I know you had a question.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna talk about the sandboxes. So I think the if you if you have, because when you refresh, right, for example, a full sandbox, you should usually bring the production data. But I think if you mask the data, especially the PI data, you greatly reduce the risk. And also, if you have single sign-on enable and a user like a developer try to bypass, one thing that we do is we put transaction security policies when they log into a non-SSO, we get alerted right away. So
Yep.
with those two things, I think masking and making sure they are on SSO, even on a lower sandbox, that greatly reduce the risk exposure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was a lot of stuff that was talked about in last week's session as well. That those kinds of things. Also, be careful when you are masking because sometimes not all masking tools are treated equally. So if you are using data masking, make sure you're testing appropriately, or just having better fabricated data if you're not confident in your masking. But I think the end of the day, the story is, regardless of if you're bringing data into a Salesforce dev environment or training environment, it is should be considered as a production environment with the same controls and attention that you give to your production environments. If it's just a test environment with test data, then that risk is definitely a lot lower. But either way, you should be making sure you have that right tooling. You've verified it, and you're watching those sandbox environments no different than those production environments. All right, so we've got one more here. Let me just pull this to my other screen. I've got it on my screen here. It says, it's someone anonymously said, as a Salesforce manager, I don't feel we're prepared at all, and I really don't know where to start beyond securing connected apps. We had an attempt, and the most I could do was alert people to not click on the email and alert me if they had. Yeah, so. Yeah, and I'm assuming whoever this is that said this is in your Salesforce environment. And that's one thing that people don't think about is on the link side of things. Like you think about your email to case do you have malicious links coming into that Salesforce environment email to case? It's no different than your Salesforce, your email. And if users are clicking on those links in that email, whether it's your Outlook or whether it's your email to case emails or email to anything, then that malicious link could lead to a phishing site, could then compromise your data in Salesforce. Also, think about the links that are going out of Salesforce as well. Are you sending links to your customers? Like, are those safe links going out? Are they, are you giving your customers something that is not safe? And so that's part of what we do with the protecting users from those malicious links. So if that's happening to you, then give us a call. Runa, I knew you have another question?
Yes, on that thing, Matt, I think I can't recall which release, but Salesforce introduced a new permission. So you need to have that permission going forward to install a connected app. So
Yes, correct.
you have to give that only
Correct.
to the very special users, not everybody. So that
Yeah,
way.
and this is something that we actually have another office hours on this one as well with the installing of the connected apps and that permission. But there is something you have to be careful of. A lot of times now, um, with an integration user, you have in order to get that connected app installed, if they're still using legacy connected apps, you have to allow that integration user to be able to install any connected apps without permission or it fails. And so opening that up is a dangerous thing, but that's something that you have to do initially. Then you can turn that permission off once you've got that connected app in your org, and then you can install it, then you can manage it. But be careful not to leave these permissions on, even for your integration users, as those permissions could be dangerous or are dangerous. All right, great. Does anyone else have any other questions? We still got about 9 minutes left, but if there's no questions, I'm happy to give you guys back some time. Let me see here. Actually, we have, I think that's all. I think we've answered all the questions here. So, or anything else? How about this? Let's open up. Does anyone have any other topics you would like to see in the future on office hours? Is there anything that's burning that you feel that, you would love to
But
see we haven't addressed?
yeah, how about we've talked a few times about transaction security. How about a session on transaction security? Maybe, you know, displaying some good use cases relative to transaction security policies, Matt.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have a couple people I know that are really versed in that. I know beaches as well, but I think I know some other people. I think that's something that's one of those things that people don't really understand. What are some good um, how to do those in the right way, and what transaction security policies actually even do in some cases.
Yeah,
Also,
I mean just the use cases too. It's like,
yeah.
we've got a few use cases that I think are great. I can talk offline if you want. But what are other, leaders in the ecosystem doing with transaction security policies would be really cool. So,
Oh yeah, I mean we've been thinking about doing a fireside chat too, which would be kind of neat. And I'd love to, bring on some more people in leadership roles that are in the weeds still enough that could talk to some of those things of what are the use cases they're seeing, where do they come into play, where they're not, what are what are the gaps? Because sometimes they're not real time, the actions you could take. That's kind of really where Salesforce going towards that, that SOAR type of capabilities that are offered in like Splunk and some other systems out there where you can actually take action, right, instead of just watching.
yeah,
And
it'd be great to see like an open source library of Apex
Mhm.
security policy code as well, So just to help jumpstart others on transaction security policies. So
Completely agree. We'll talk to Tristan about getting something teed up for that on a thing. Another thing I was thinking about is for people that don't have shield or even if you do some other area ways that you could protect against those users like we were talking about the limited admin profiles for your devs and specifically you could build in your dev environments frameworks that you don't have in your prod. So we do this ourselves. We have a different repo that's for code specifically that goes into sandboxes and dev environments. Some are testing frameworks, but others that you could use are, for example, maybe you don't want anyone to be able to create a user unless they have at all, or maybe a custom permission or something like that. So you could put code in there, and then you could track if that code was changed. So then, if someone changed the code that should never be changed, because in that dev environment you would know it because your CI/CD told you that someone changed that code. That's actually a security control for your developers in that org. So those are some other potential things you could do to help protect those development environments, in addition to things like transaction security policies in your dev orgs as well. All right, great. Well, I think that's unless anyone else has other questions, I think this pretty much is good for today. I'll go ahead and let's look and wrap up early. And Stephen, I think you have one more question.
One last comment. I'd love, Matt, for you to somehow pull your user base and understand how sophisticated your user base is. Because when we talk about, CI/CD pipelines, I'm not sure that's 90% of Salesforce orgs, right? I'm guessing that's 10% of Salesforce orgs. So A lot of times we discuss fairly sophisticated security measures. Um, we're talking about limiting developers in sandboxes. I bet most orgs are struggling to limit developers in production,
That
right?
too.
If your user base is 90% in that category, it'd be interesting to understand that and speak to that as well as the more complex situations.
Yeah, maybe we could do some special hands-on sessions too, where we could show how to implement some of these tools. Like, yeah, because there's so many of these. There didn't used to be the case, but there's so many CI/CD tools out there now, like your compilers, your gear sets, even Salesforce DevOps Center, where you can implement this DX, of course, if you want to roll your own. I mean, I know there's so many organizations, especially smaller organizations, that don't really even understand what DevOps is or that. I mean, I remember myself personally 15, 16 years ago when I first got started as a developer or even longer in Salesforce, we were building in prod. Of course, we were saying, okay, what I don't understand the sandbox thing. We're just going to build it and deploy it in prod, right? It's so I think it's just the evolution of the maturity of those organizations. And one of the problems in just general, of course, is the Salesforce ecosystem, as we keep saying, is the maturity of security programs in the Salesforce space within organizations. You might have a mature other programs, but the most people lack that maturity, whether it's in just general security, configurations, development, I mean, deployment, all the DevOps. I mean, that there's multiple areas. I know I forget who it is, and I should know this, but there's a group that's putting together like a Salesforce security review or framework to assess the health of the security. And it looks like they're doing like different controls and things like that. And so that'll be really neat to see when that comes out. I'm trying to get involved in that myself. So, but all right, great. Okay, well, we'll go and wrap up. If you have any other questions anyone wants to ask, feel free. You can always DM me, and happy to always answer questions. Plus, of course, any other ideas. We'll definitely get that transaction security topic on the docket. I think that's going to be interesting. And as we were talking about, like the DevOps CI/CD, I think that's a great idea for those teams that don't even know what CI/CD stands for, and trying to get that a little bit lower level or higher, more broad topic to help educate people that you should not be building in your prod environments. But anyway, until then, thank you everyone again for joining office hours. I appreciate the time for everybody, and hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.